for the first session on a recipe for effective and efficient teaching. Today we have with us Professor Sripath Karmarkar sir. He is a professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering and also professor at Teaching Learning Center IIT Madras. On behalf of IQAC Sri Shankara College Kaladi and all present here, I welcome you sir to handle the session. Thank you.
Good morning to all of you. Let's start our session. I am quickly going to recapitulate the recipe. I will not read out because I think I have done it a number of times in the previous sessions. Please read it once. Okay, so now we are at the content delivery. That is point number 4. That is what we had started. I had mentioned yesterday that designing good questions is very, very important for proper learning of the material, right? In order that students learn properly. Someone had asked me an example of an open book exam question. Okay, so before I go on to the communication skill part, let me quickly show you an example of open book exam question. Is that fine, Manju? Shall we do that?
Excuse me, sir. The PowerPoint presentation or?
No, I said I will show the question, an example of an open book question before we move on to the content delivery part.
Okay.
Yeah, the PowerPoint presentation by the participant will come in maybe 5-10 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah. I just want to check that the person who asked for this open book exam question is there. Let him respond on the chat. One participant.
Manju, it was Dr. Biju Thomas.
Is he there?
Dr. Biju Thomas, are you here? Hello? Dr. Biju Thomas?
Manju is not yet.
Sorry?
I think he is not here. He has some power failure at home, he says.
Oh, okay. Doesn't matter. Then I will probably reserve it for the end. Let us continue with the communication. Is that okay?
Okay, sir.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, yesterday I mentioned a test for deciding whether a person has communication skills. This is the quotation. You never truly understand something until you can explain it to your grandmother. So here, actually, I should also include communication. You never truly understand something and can claim to have communication skill until you can explain it to your grandmother, right? So in other words, ability to explain our ideas to a person who doesn't specialize in our area, that is the mark of communication skill. This is a very simple but very, very effective measure of communication skill, right? Yesterday I mentioned that 55% of the impact made by a speaker depends on his or her body language. 38% impact depends on how you speak. This includes pace, pause, pitch, pronunciation. And only 7% of the impact depends on choice of words. More specifically, if spoken message and body language are contradictory, audience gives more weight to the body language. And I mentioned in online courses, body language may not play a role. There, how you speak becomes most important thing. Okay, but then every time we are not going to do online. Okay, so let me explain this statement. If spoken message and body language are contradictory, audience gives more weight to the body language. See, the first time I went outside India to a foreign country. It was Germany, to which I had been to Germany, right? Now, my host had come to pick me up from the airport. He picked me up and then both of us went to a restaurant. And there, for the first time, we were facing each other. Otherwise, before that, when he accompanied me from the airport to the restaurant, we were walking side by side. So when we sat and he started asking me, what should we order? Within a few minutes, I found that he was facing some difficulty. And he opened up. He said, he asked me, called me by my first name, Shripad. He said, Shripad, do you mind if I ask you a personal question? I was wondering, what personal question he might have. He said, see, when you nod your head, I am not able to figure out whether you are saying yes or no. For example, I say, shall we order some orange juice? I see that you nod your head in some way. For instance, I was doing like this. And then I say, shall we order some apple wine? And then you move in some other way, right? For example, I used to say no. So that is what I thought I was saying. But he was getting confused. So he said, I want to know when you say yes and when you say no. Then I asked him, okay, in Germany, how do you nod your head if you want to say yes and if you want to say no? So he said that in Germany, the practice is, if you want to say yes, you nod your head vertically. This is yes. If you want to say no, you nod your head horizontally. Okay? Like this. And he said, so look, if you do this, I don't know whether it means yes or no. So I could figure out that he did have a problem. You see, I was uttering the word yes and no. Though I was uttering the words yes and no, he gave more importance to my nodding of the head rather than what I was uttering. This is exactly what is meant by if spoken message and body language are contradictory, audience gives more weight to the body language. This is a very important point any speaker should know. So related to this body language, because it is very important and all teachers should know about this, it makes 55% impact. I will play a video clip and this will also introduce the teachers to videos and material available on the internet for improving your communication skills. So I'm going to play the video. First, I have to go back, stop sharing, then I will open the audio. Now I share. Just a moment, I'm doing this. Yes, everybody is able to see?
Yes.
Yeah, I have not played it, started playing it yet. I will play it now. And Dr. Manju, you please tell me whether it is audible after I start playing.
Okay. It's not audible, sir.
Pardon?
It's not audible. Not audible.
Oh, it is not audible.
Yeah.
Okay, then what I will suggest is all the participants, you can please note this name. You are able to see it, right?
Yes.
You're able to see the video. It is available on YouTube. You can note down the name Deborah, Deborah Grayson, Grayson. Please note down this name. You put in Google and you put body language, 2 keywords, Deborah Grayson, body language. You will get this video. Okay. And you will get other videos by the same speaker, by the same instructor. They're very nice. They're very short, not more than 3 to 4 minutes each. But each video gives you the important aspects of developing communication skills, oral communication. Okay. And they are very instructive. They give you an example of how body language is important. Okay. So I will close this video. Okay. So now I think this is the right time to have the presentation. Who is going to do it?
Srija Narayanan will do it. Srija?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you can,
hello?
Sir,
So
can we start?
Sure. So what, shall I, anything I have to do from here? Nothing.
Nothing.
Okay.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, good morning. I'm Srija Narayanan. I'm here to share with you the topic, Wake Up to an Ayurvedic Lifestyle, Back to Roots. Let me take the PPT, please. Please wait.
Yes, Srija, it's okay.
Okay. Dear friends, during these tough times, our main concern is to stay safe and healthy. We'll have to depend on our own ways of survival unless and until a vaccine is invented for COVID-19. We have our own system of natural healing which has its origin in the Vedic culture of India. Why can't we go back to our roots practiced for about 5,000 years? This is a question which I intend to pose. I share here some of this knowledge which I tried to develop from my sister, who is an Ayurvedic physician, and from certain readings. Please look at the slides. According to Ayurveda, there are 6 seasons: Shishiram, Vasantam, Grishmam, Varsham, Sharat, Hemantam. Shishiram, Vasantam and Grishmam are together called Uttarayan. Varsham, Sharat and Hemantam are called Dakshinayan. Uttarayan is the position of sun in the north and Dakshinayan is sun's position in the south. Each season comprises 2 months. Daily routine. These are the routines one can practice irrespective of the season. As we are on the wait for the monsoon, Varsha Ritu, we will discuss certain healthcare measures which we can adopt during these months. Routines during rainy season. In the morning, so I'm just going to the morning sessions. You know that well begun is half done. So wake up at Brahma Muhurta, consume 2 glasses of warm water. Nasya is good for our sense organs. Exercise according to half of one's strength. Massage with a suitable oil. Bath in warm water. Varsha Ritu or monsoon is the starting season of Dakshinayan, since it is the transition from Uttarayan and the inception of Dakshinayan, our immunity becomes weaker. Here are certain diet and lifestyle modifications recommended by Ayurveda, the sign of life. See the diet plans. So let's look into the do's and don'ts in diet. First, we'll go to the do's. Consume light and fresh food. Drink boiled and cooled water. Include honey, ghee, lentils, lean meat, rice, and wheat. Salty, sour, and warm food can be taken. It is good to consume haritaki. So now what are the don'ts? Avoid leafy vegetables during this month. Avoid curd, red meat, and heavy food items. Avoid drinking excess of fluids because it weakens the digestive system. During this season, digestive power will be weak, and so medicines will be less potent due to excess water content. Moving to the next slide. As it is rainy season, our skin may develop certain kinds of allergies. These are the daily skincare plans that one can implement. Massage your skin with herbal powders. Oil your skin and steam once or twice a week. Apply daily face packs with suitable herbal packs. Apply essential oils like jojoba oil or tea tree oil. It will keep your skin moist and glowing. So here are some immunity boosting herbs. Ginger, garlic, pepper, long pepper, turmeric, gooseberry, cinnamon, cardamom, cumin, and fennel. We use almost all of them in our daily diet. Surprisingly, all of them are very good immunity boosters. Gooseberry, for example, is a storehouse of vitamin C. A gooseberry a day definitely will keep the illness away. Look into some immunity boosting herbal drinks. So if you have a habit of drinking tea quite often in rainy season, this is something which I recommend to you. See, the first drink, we call it ginger tea. So it is an antioxidant, it rejuvenates you. It is antiviral, it is antibacterial, especially tulsi, as you know, has anti-parasitic qualities. Look into the second drink, turmeric mixed in glass of warm milk. It is also known as golden milk. It is antibacterial. It strengthens your immune system. Look into the third one, coffee made with dried ginger, pepper, cardamom, and jaggery. It is an antioxidant. Fourth one, tea made with hibiscus powder. Very good for cholesterol and normalizes blood sugar level. The last one, soup made with lentils, it makes our body warm. Dear friends, all these preventive measures cannot be taken for granted as a treatment against any epidemic or pandemic. But certainly, these are lifestyle pruners which viruses and which prepares us to attain immunity against the viruses and microorganisms. Stay home, stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Srija.
Okay. Thank you very much, Srija. And it was a good presentation. The font size on your slides was perfect. That is how it should be. You should not have too much of text on the PowerPoint slides. And your speech was also, the pace was not too high or too low, and it was appropriate. Okay. So I would say it was a good presentation. I don't have anything particularly critical about the contents, right? But I will use this presentation as an example to make some points which are not necessarily directed at this presentation, right? So the points I would like to make are the following. If you look at this presentation, it discusses facts and procedures. Okay. Now in any presentation, you can have 4 possible things, namely facts, 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 procedures, principles, and concepts. Facts concepts, principles, procedures, right? They are the 4 things. Now, this presentation, facts and procedures were there, but concepts or principles were not discussed. I'm not saying, again, I want to emphasize, I'm not criticizing this presentation. I'm only telling that in a presentation, what all can be there. Generally, for example, when people go for, applying, when they make a presentation to join as a faculty in some institution, I'm taking that as an example. And then they want to know, what are the criteria for making a good presentation that will impress a selection committee or people who are sitting in the audience. So generally, it is said that a presentation should be high on either concepts or principles. The content, most of the content should be about concepts and principles, and it should be less about facts and procedures. The reason is, understanding a concept or a principle requires higher level of thinking. Whereas understanding facts and procedures, it doesn't require higher level thinking. Okay, so that is the comment I would like to make, that if people are making presentations for faculty selection or things like that, or for employment and so on, and they want to know, what kind of a presentation will impress the others. So generally, if your presentation has concepts or principles and less of facts and procedures, then it will be appealing. Its quality will be rated high. Okay. Here I'm not talking about the speech or the quality of the slide. I'm talking about the quality of the content. That is what I'm saying. I just want to know whether this point is clear from the audience, or if they have some questions about this, I will take on the chat.
On the chat box, it's everyone is saying it was a nice presentation. It is clear, sir.
So let me give you an example. Say in this presentation, what would be an example of a concept, right? So one thing you can do, again, this will require more time. That is why I am not criticizing the presentation. I'm saying what can be done, right? Because when you go for employment or whatever, it won't be 5-minute presentation. They will say you can have 15 minutes, 20 minutes presentation, right? So you'll have time. So for instance, here one could include what is the principle of Ayurveda, right? How does Ayurveda help remove diseases and so on? So you can connect the kind of food you should eat to the principles of Ayurveda. So you can, maybe a couple of slides one can discuss about principle of Ayurveda. For example, Vata, Pitta, Kapha and all these concepts are there, right? And then based on that, they have a theory for a disease, and then they provide solutions. So that could be an example of a concept or a principle, right? Discussion of that. That is how you can add this element into your presentation. Shall we move on to the next point then?
Okay.
Or is there any questions in the chat? In the chat, do you see any questions?
No, there's nothing there, Manju, except for someone who's written that voice modulation may be needed due to the poor audio.
Okay. Fine. So let me get back to my slide. Okay. You are able to see the slide?
Yes, yes, sir.
Yeah. So let me focus a little bit on pronunciation, this particular aspect. I'm talking in general, not in reference to the presentation. Okay, that part is over now. Pronunciation is very important for a teacher. Many times they do not realize it. I was doing this course workshop, right, on how can teachers make a difference in one of the NITs. One teacher after my session came and told me, sir, all this, what you talked about factors governing effectiveness of communication, it is nice in theory, but practically I think it doesn't work. So I asked him why you feel like that. Then he started explaining what he is doing for his course. And he said in 5 years, every time he goes with better presentation, that is what he said. Better introduction to the various chapters and better illustrative examples, and he has tried all these things, but the student rating of his course has not improved at all. Now he spoke to me for just a couple of minutes. In those couple of minutes, I understood where is the problem. For him, the problem was in the pronunciation. I had a lot of difficulty understanding what he is saying because his pronunciation was not proper. More specifically, he came from West Bengal and he was teaching in Punjab, in an NIT in Punjab, right? So his accent was heavily influenced by Bengali. So he had a Bengali accent on his English. And in Punjab, you have a different accent of people, right? So they had difficulty understanding him. Though he was a very knowledgeable person and he was taking a lot of interest in looking for good examples and proper introduction and so on, still the impact he was not able to make simply because of his lack of proper pronunciation. So that is how even some of these aspects in how you speak and your body language may have a lot of impact on the audience, right? Now, how do I know whether my body language is good or not, whether my speech is good or not, and so on? So this is why, as I will tell you later, you must be open to feedback from colleagues, because many times what happens is students don't give you the feedback, right? Student may not say, for example, that your pace is very slow or very fast. Student will only say classes are boring. Now you have to figure out why they feel it is boring. Is it the content, or is it your body language, or is it the way you speak? So an expert, however, can sit in your class and he or she may be able to give you that guidance. Okay, so you must collect feedback from the student and then you present it to an expert and ask the expert to sit in the class. That expert may be able to interpret the student feedback for you and suggest changes that you should make. Okay. Another way is to record your class. Right now it is easily possible. You have all these tools. So video record, say 10 minutes of your class and then present it to an expert. And then ask him, what are the areas in which I can improve? Okay. So eye contact is another important thing. Many teachers miss this point. So here nicely it is being put in a poetic form. What the eyes say goes straight into the heart. Trust not the tongue, for it may stray any time. Right? So eyes are very important in communication. You have people saying, he teaches looking out into the doors and windows. An example of body language, I will tell you. And this a teacher shared with me. She said that I used to explain the clockwise motion by making a clockwise movement of my hand. Okay, and this was to school children. Now what happened is, when she asked the children to demonstrate clockwise motion, she found that they were making an anti-clockwise movement of their hand. And then she realized the problem was that when she does a clockwise movement, the audience which is sitting in front of her gets it anti-clockwise. Okay. Now, it is interesting that she actually used the blackboard to show the clockwise movement, right? So when you show it on the blackboard, then you and the audience are facing the board. Then you show it correctly. But if you're not using a blackboard and simply doing this hand movement, right, yourself, then it gives a opposite picture. Now this is an excellent example of how, even though the emotion was shown on the blackboard, still the body language of the teacher had more impact on the students. Okay, so this is how your body language influences the audience much more than what you speak. I've already explained to you my conversational experience in a foreign journey about body language. Many young teachers have a problem with the pace. They tend to move fast because they want to cover a lot of material. In fact, an article on teaching brought out this very important point. And a teacher was sharing his experience of journey of so many years at the time of retirement. And he said that when I joined this institution, right, I used to go prepared to the class, and within half an hour I used to cover all the material. It is a 50 minutes class that he has prepared for, but within half an hour he would complete all the material. Now, before retirement, however, his difficulty was how to cover the syllabus, because he would spend a lot of time explaining one idea, right? And so he would go to the class thinking that I will have to cover this material, and by the end of the class he would end up only covering some 60 or 70% of the material, because he would give lengthy explanations for concepts. So this is one issue. A young teacher has this problem of going fast, and a very senior teacher has the problem that he or she tends to explain too much. Okay, so one has to have this judicious balance. So the advice to a young teacher is think fast but speak slowly. So about pronunciation, I have already told you this teacher's misperception about his research on effective communication. Okay, so before I go to the next topic of using analogies in teaching for improving student learning, I want to just check if people have any questions or comments on the chat. Any questions or comments, or shall we move on?
Nothing yet, sir. Can move on.
Okay. Okay. Now, using analogies. This is another important area where teachers can be creative. So one area where teachers can be creative, we have said, is setting good questions. Okay. Another area where teachers can be creative is in explanations using analogies. Okay. Here is some conclusion from research. Analogies aid students in relating an unfamiliar concept to one that may be more recognizable, improving their understanding and retention by 40%. This I am quoting from these research papers by Garner and Glenn. Now, so there is an entire area. Okay, if any of you is interested in research literature on teaching learning process, a lot of papers are published in an area called teaching with analogies. This is an area, teaching with analogies, where they have tried to study that what are the positive effects of using analogies, what are the negative effects of using analogies, and so on. What kind of analogies are appropriate and how an analogy should be presented. Okay. So let me give you an example from my own experience of using an analogy and what are its advantages. Now, I have to use the board, which means I'm going to use a paper first. You might have, all teachers might have seen that I want to just show this. I am not able to see myself. How do I see myself?
Sir, I think you need to stop sharing your slides.
Okay. Just 1 minute. Yeah. So,
Yes, yes,
you are able to see this figure?
yes.
Yeah. So what the figure shows is how conduction of current is explained to the students. So what it shows is a semiconductor block or a conductor block in which to which a cell has been connected, right? Are you able to see the cell?
Yes.
Yeah. So when you connect a cell, inside what happens is you have positive charge carriers, mobile carriers, they will move. And the movement, sorry? You
That
said
was
something?
some noise. That was some noise, sir.
Oh, noise. Okay. So the carriers will move and the movement is shown by an arrow, straight arrow. Are you able to see the straight arrow?
Yes.
Yeah, that is all what I want you to see in this picture. So a straight arrow is used to show movement of carriers and explain how the current flows when you connect a cell. Now the problem with this picture, is that suppose there is no cell connected, then what will be the movement of the holes? How will you show that? Someone can respond on the chat. If you are showing the current using an arrow, right, when the cell is connected, if the cell is removed and then you want to show what is the movement of the carrier in the absence of the cell, what will be your inference about the movement? I want some response on the chat or, orally.
Dr. Sujata has commented random walk.
Yeah, but if it is random walk when there is no cell, then when you put the cell, how can it be just a straight arrow?
Rajesh, he has said crossed arrow.
Crossed arrow, meaning?
Rajesh, would you like to clarify?
Yeah.
No transmission happened.
Sorry?
After removing that cell, there is no movement of electrons.
Yeah,
to
there
show
is no
the charge
movement.
crossing the movement direction.
Correct. Exactly. So if I use a straight arrow to show the movement of a carrier from the positive terminal to the negative terminal, when you connect the cell, then it follows that if I don't apply the cell, then that means there will be no movement, as he has rightly said. Okay. Now the problem with this thing is following. If those who are familiar with sciences, physics, chemistry teachers, right, or engineering teachers, right, they will know that Newton's law, they will recall Newton's law says that if a body is in rest, right, when no force is applied, then when you apply a force, it will accelerate. So now you can see, if I apply this law to this picture, when there is no cell, the carrier is not moving, so it is at rest. So when I apply a cell, the carrier will start accelerating. Now accelerating means its velocity will go on increasing with time. That means the current will go on increasing with time. Whereas what we experience is that when you apply a cell, there is a steady current, DC current. Current doesn't increase with time if the cell voltage is constant. So there is this problem with this picture. Okay. As another participant correctly remarked, that when there is no cell, actually the particle will undergo a random thermal motion, random walk. So you can only explain the constant current in response to a constant DC voltage, if you take into account the fact that when there is no cell, the particle is undergoing a random walk and it is not at rest, because the particle is at rest when there is no cell, then according to Newton's law, it will accelerate, and that means current should increase with time. But if a particle is undergoing a random walk when there is no cell, it can be shown that because of the collisions of the particle with other entities, even when you apply a cell, it will acquire a constant average velocity and it will not accelerate, because if it tries to accelerate, it will collide with other particles, surrounding particles, and it will lose that acceleration. Then again it will try to accelerate, again it will lose the acceleration. So on average, it will acquire a constant average velocity. Now, in my course, I used to teach this concept, solid state devices course. That is my area of specialization. It comes in second year of engineering or first semester, or that is fourth semester or fifth semester. Now, what would happen is the following. In the 12th standard, however, the random walk concept is not introduced to the student. Okay, in 12th standard, a simple picture is given where you show a straight arrow. Okay, and so now the problem is the following, and this is an important point all of us should understand. Whenever, whatever concept is taught first, okay, it makes a deep impression on a student, and later on, even if you try to improve, unless you take special effort to wipe out the previous understanding, the previous understanding persists with the student. And that is why many times, even after undergoing 4 years of engineering, there is not much addition in terms of new concepts and so on to the student's mind. So learning has not happened. People have undergone courses, but really the amount of learning has not changed compared to 12th standard. Okay, this is what happens. So I used to find this among my students, that in the beginning of the course I talk about, I'll go back to my slide now. Yeah, are you able to see the slide?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I used to teach this concept that carriers are undergoing a random walk when there is no cell, and then I used to derive how, starting from that, you will get a constant average current and constant average velocity of the carrier when you apply an electric field or a force because of the cell. After about the middle of the semester, some students used to come back to me with some doubts about current flow. And then I used to find that they are starting from a wrong understanding of the current flow. And then I used to ask them to write on a piece of paper, you know, whatever they are trying to explain. And they would go back to that diagram which I showed in the beginning, where a straight arrow is shown, okay, to explain how current happens. Straight arrow for a carrier inside a semiconductor. And then they would realize, oh, they have made a mistake. They have gone back to the 12th standard understanding of the current flow. That is why they are getting into this problem. So I used to wonder, how should I teach this concept of motion, electron transport in semiconductors, so that their previous understanding is removed. It's like updating a file. Their file is not getting updated in the mind. So this is where I found analogy helps. So I used to then explain, I started introducing this concept using an analogy. And this analogy is as follows. So left hand side, you can see that a carrier is shown undergoing a random walk as well as a directed motion towards the contact. So this is, I am showing an electron in this case. So it is a negative carrier. That is why it is going from negative contact to positive contact inside the semiconductor. So this is the path of the carrier during current flow. And to impress on students that this is the path, I used to give this analogy. So you consider a box of sweets on which some insects are hovering. When you are not moving the box of sweets, it is stationary. The movement of the insects replicates the movement of the electron in the semiconductor. It is, the insects are undergoing a random motion. Now, when you move the box, supposing I move the box of sweets towards the right, the insects will undergo random motion, and at the same time they will move in the direction of the box. because they'll always try to remain on the sweets. So this movement of the insects, which is directed motion superimposed over random motion, this simulates the motion of the electron in a semiconductor. So in this analogy, carrier motion is analogous to insect motion, and force on carriers due to electric field is longing of insects for the sweets. Because the insects want to be with the sweets, they will move along with the box. So what has this analogy done? What this analogy has done is an abstract idea of electron transport in semiconductors. It has illustrated using a concrete experience which a student can experience using his 5 senses. The reason why students do not grasp this electron transport in semiconductors fully, or they cannot retain that understanding, at the end of the class they may have, but after about 10 more classes they will forget. So the lack of retention is because of the fact that it is an abstract concept. Students cannot see an electron. Nobody has seen an electron moving. So it is a story that is being cooked up and told to the student, right? This is very abstract. So that is why a student is not able to retain. So if we introduce abstract concepts using concrete examples, something that students can experience. Students have seen insects hovering on the box of sweets. So this is concrete. So when you tell that electron motion in semiconductor is like motion of the insects on box of sweet, then the idea becomes concrete and the retention is improved. Okay. So I will give you some evidence that it actually improved student learning, right? So here, so first I want to say that concepts like this I have published in a journal called IEEE Transactions on Education. So some of you teachers may be interested in research in teaching learning. They want to know what is a good journal for that. So IEEE Transaction on Education is a good journal, right? Reputed journal. I have published this in that journal. Now here is an example of how students have responded. So I have a video course on internet. It is quite popular. Its title is Solid State Devices. Okay, so students all over the world watch this course and they keep sending me some emails on their own. I don't ask them because I don't even know the students. So here is one such student who has written an email. You can just see this email. Now this student is a mechanical engineering student who was trying to understand electronics, and he had some difficulties, so he watched the videos to understand devices, how they work. You can see that he has referred to the analogies. Okay, so I have got numerous emails, and interestingly all of them refer to the analogies I have used in the course to explain some of the ideas. So here is one more example. You can just see this email. Okay, so this is to give evidence that analogies actually help learning. Okay, there are some more like that. I will skip this. I want to just refer you to this Panchatantra. All of you may be knowing about Panchatantra. It is an ancient Indian collection of interrelated animal fables, right? And you know the background of this, that apparently some king had princes who were not very intelligent and they appeared to be dumb. So he announced that, is there any teacher who can teach my children and impart wisdom to them? Because in those days, the kingdom used to be passed on from the father to the son, right? King to the princess. So some teacher came up and then he took that challenge to teach these dumb children about wisdom in life, practical wisdom. And this is the Panchatantra, right? So what is Panchatantra doing? If you carefully see, all teachers I feel should relook at Panchatantra. What this Panchatantra is doing is introducing practical wisdom through analogies, okay, metaphors. So that is the powerful role of analogies in teaching difficult concepts to students. So this is one area where teachers should explore. Okay, whatever subjects they are teaching, usually if it is a face-to-face interaction workshop, I give some 5 minutes teachers to present their analogies from their subjects, okay, which they might have found interesting. So I will pause here and still I will get some responses on the chat where they can probably give examples of analogies they have used in their subjects. One example. Let's see whether we get some responses. So I want to confirm that you are able to see the slide, right?
Yes, sir. Sir, Manju has written interference of light waves.
So what is the analogy?
Waves superimposing from a stone fallen in a pond.
Yeah, very good. Yes. So that is how you can show, give analogy for interference of waves. True. Any other example?
Not yet, sir.
Okay, we'll move on. Now, using PowerPoint and Blackboard, which is better? Teachers want to know this. Yeah.
So there's one more in immunology, skin like BSF.
So what is the analogy?
Dr. K. Manjusha, would you like to explain?
Yeah.
BSF, Border Security Force.
Okay, Border Security Force is analogy for?
In immunology, skin is like BSF.
Acha.
Skin is protecting the body as a barrier.
Pardon?
The skin is like the BSF.
Skin is protecting us.
Okay.
Sir, in
Shania
first
Festus,
defense,
right?
Sorry?
Skin is a protecting barrier as the BSF Jawans, protecting our nation.
It's like the first defense, line of defense.
Okay, the skin is like that. Okay, right.
Shania Festus writes, covalent bonding like marriage, equal sharing.
Okay. Okay, right. So shall we move on or any more are there?
More are coming in, sir.
Rekha S writes, in quantum mechanics, wave function is compared to horoscope of the system.
Okay. Yes, interesting.
I think that's all, sir. We can move on.
Okay. So let's talk about board, using a board versus using PowerPoint. Which is a better way to teach? So someone said that it is like asking this following question: which is a better way to eat, with a fork or with a spoon? What is the answer? I want participants to respond on chat. Is it better to use a fork or better to use a spoon?
Everyone's saying depends on the food.
Exactly. So depends on the food. So apparently this question, whether board is better or PowerPoint is better, is exactly like that. You can't say one is the best option, a better option compared to the other. It depends on the situation. So generally, for instance, if you are using PowerPoint, the important thing is you should not put the entire material of the slide at once. See, for example, right here, an example would be, I go back to my slide to explain this. Recipe for effective and efficient teaching. I should not put the whole slide at once in the beginning. If I do that, what happens is, Suddenly a lot of material is presented to the student. This is really confusing. Many times what happens is the teachers feel, okay, I will put the whole slide and then I will say, let us concentrate on point number 1. Okay, I will even use a pointer and then try to. But what happens is when point number 1 is there, at the same time you are able to see all other points, and that is distracting. Okay, so compared to this, if let us say the way I did it earlier, right, in the beginning. So first you say recipe for effective and efficient teaching. Then you put point number 1. You talk about it maybe half a minute or something. Then you put the next point and then you talk about that. Then you put the next one. Then talk about it. So this is the way PowerPoint should be used. This is very, very important while using PowerPoint. Never put the entire thing at once. Today I put it in the beginning. That is because I have already done it in previous 2 classes, right? So for example, if you are summarizing the previous class in the next class, beginning of the next class, perhaps you can put the whole thing at once because already students have been exposed to the thing, right? You would have seen some of the news channels also follow this approach. First, they will put each news bite one by one, and then after 4 or 5 news bites, then they will put all of them together, right? As a summary. So that approach is the right approach for using PowerPoint. Then it simulates the blackboard. See, in blackboard, what happens is, supposing a teacher is using a blackboard to present the same material of this slide. What the teacher will do is, teacher will write A, then R, E, C, I, P, E, F, O, R, then E, F, F, like that. Teacher will go on writing. So that is the advantage of the blackboard, that the material is presented slowly, and that helps in better grasping, right? The difficulty with the PowerPoint is more material is presented at once. Okay. So you want to simulate the blackboard effect, please put line by line. Okay. On the other hand, there are advantages of the PowerPoint also. For instance, some of the things, even if you put slowly a recipe for effective and efficient teaching, if you write on the blackboard, instead of that, if you put it on a slide, you are able to present the same material in a shorter time, right? And in this case, it will not affect. It will in fact give you more time to discuss other things. So this is how one can use PowerPoint and Blackboard judiciously, right? Where should you use a Blackboard? Suppose you are drawing a diagram. You are showing it on a PowerPoint. What happens is the student doesn't know how the whole diagram should be drawn, right? Step by step. Okay. I have seen this problem. There are some teachers who teach electromagnetic waves, for example, using slides. So they will always use a slide to show the wave. Then when the students are asked to draw the electromagnetic wave, they get into difficulty because they don't know how to draw it, because they've always seen the entire picture as a photograph, right? So this is an example where apart from using a PowerPoint, the teacher should also use the board. So same thing that is there on the slide, once at least the teacher should draw on the board. Then students know how to draw it. Okay. Yes. Do people have any questions on this PowerPoint versus Blackboard? Otherwise, that is all what I had to say about this. Are you seeing any question in the chat?
No, sir.
Okay. So now I'm again putting the recipe for effective and efficient teaching slide because I want to mention the next point. Now we have covered so far the point number 4, content delivery. Okay. Pay due attention to your body language and how you speak, use analogies and explanations, and we have discussed how PowerPoint and Blackboard should be used judiciously. So next point is test or quiz students frequently and provide feedback on students' answers to questions. This is the next point. As I mentioned earlier, providing feedback to the student is something that is heart of a teacher's profession, right? As some expert remarked that if at all we are paying the teachers, it is because of providing feedback to the students on their learning and how to improve. So let us look at that. Testing and feedback to the students. Please read this slide. I don't want to, discuss this. Just read this slide. So these are the various advantages of testing. I want to emphasize that when I say test, it doesn't necessarily mean giving a written exam and always grading it and including that grade in the final evaluation. Even asking questions in the class is a form of testing, right? Where you don't penalize a student for a wrong answer. Okay. Now let me come to the importance of feedback. My experience from e-research symposium. In the electrical engineering department, we conduct a symposium every year. In the symposium, 10 research scholars who are in their final year of PhD, mean 5th year. They are selected from all areas, from different areas of the department, and then they are trained to give a talk for 18 to 20 minutes. Each talk is 18 to 20 minutes. That is the time given to the student. Now let me tell you the training aspect, because this is where the feedback comes. So the training program schedule is as follows. All these 10 students are first asked to bring title of their talk. A meeting is organized for them, and this meeting is coordinated by a faculty member, but throughout all the students give feedback to each other. That is the important point there. A teacher is also there, but the students are also giving feedback to each other. Okay. So first meeting is to discuss the title. So one student will come and put the title on the board or put it on a PowerPoint. Now all other students, please note that the students are from different areas. They are not from the same area. This is also a crucial point to note here. So all the other students, so there are 10 students, right? So 9 students will then look at the title and they will give their feedback whether they understand the subject from the title. Very often what happens is the students are used to using abbreviations in the title, and they will put it in such technical form that no one else will understand even the meaning of the title. So no, people will not come and attend such seminars. Why will they attend? Because you are giving the impression that you are going to talk about something that only you understand, right? So I will give you an example. A student put the title as follows for his seminar, right? During this discussion of the title. Modeling of the maximum temperature at the junction of a heterojunction transistor. Modeling the maximum temperature at the junction of a heterojunction transistor. Now students said, okay, we understand temperature. We understand modeling, but we don't know what is junction. And heterojunction transistor is again a very, technical term. So this kind of a thing doesn't look very interesting, because the particular symposium is meant for the entire department. All the students gather here as audience and all the teachers. Then some student said, can you explain what you want to discuss in your talk? Then the student started explaining, this is what I want to do. He drew a diagram and so on. And then somebody said, oh, what you are saying is you want to talk about how hot is your transistor. Okay. Then the student said, yes, that is essentially what. Then he said, no, why don't you put that as a title? So title of my talk is how hot is my transistor? That is the talk. Okay. Now transistor, heterojunction transistor is a very technical word, but the word transistor everybody has heard, right? At least in engineering and Department of Electrical Engineering, yes, definitely. So this is how one can frame titles which are very appealing to a broad audience. This is a very crucial point in communication. What I have told in the beginning, you can claim to have a good communication skill only if you can explain your idea to your grandmother. So the same concept is applied here. So the title is modified until all the 9 students say they understand the title. Okay. So this is meeting number 1. It takes, we have seen, it takes about 3 hours because everyone's title should be modified. So the first student's title, it may take 15 to 20 minutes to get modified and come to a form in which it looks very appealing and interesting. However, when this is happening, all the other 9 students are changing their own titles because they know, what changes should be done. So the next student comes, within 5 minutes, the title can be refined. Okay. Next, the students are asked to bring the introduction of their talk. 2 or 3 slides of introduction. And then that is discussed and debated. Okay. And so on. So this is how about 3 to 4 meetings are held to finalize parts of the talk. Then the student is asked to present this talk to a non-specialist student who then gives same feedback. And finally, the student is asked to present it to a non-specialist teacher. Okay. So this is the entire schedule, training schedule, where you can see extensively feedback is being given to the speaker by non-specialists throughout. Then when the students come and present in the symposium, I will show you some feedback that we have got, right, from people. So here is one feedback, one faculty wrote. So the point is, a lot of material is available on good communication, right? What is the meaning of good communication? How to prepare slides, how to speak and so on. But just by reading, the students cannot develop the skill. There is a need to give active feedback to the student on his or her own presentation. It is good to have material, books and so on, right? To give as a starting point. But this feedback is something that is very important, and only a teacher can do this job, right? So this is the job of the teacher, to give feedback and train people. So you should have a proper design training. You should design your training also properly. In what way you will give the feedback. You have to give feedback to parts of the material learned, right? So how to divide that material, which parts you will go in which sequence, and on which part you will give feedback first, then on which part you will give next. All this is important. Okay, so I'll pause here and see if there are any questions, because I'm going to the next topic. That is how to take feedback from students and experts. That is the next topic. And that is the last topic of the day. I mean, for my session. So any questions on the chat or comments?
Someone has written
yeah.
Manju, can you see the message? I think I just left.
Dr. Biju Thomas has written in the chat box, not in the conversation box. Could you please explain the procedure to design good quality open book examination which can cater to all types of learners?
That is what. So that is the thing, that I said I will show at the end of my lecture a good quality question. I'll give an example of that.
Okay.
Okay, because right now, if I do that, it will interrupt the flow. That topic is not related to this. Am I right?
Yes. Yes, yes, sir. Because
Yeah,
he
so we'll,
just came in because he had some signal problem. That's why.
yeah. So we will complete the thing and then we will take up that.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Regarding feedback, no questions have come in yet.
Okay. So the point is, we should make the learner do a lot of activity. That is what we can, that is the gist of what I'm saying. This teacher is there not only to deliver the talk. So now you will appreciate that more and more we realize that to ensure good learning, the learner should be made more and more active. Instead of the teacher alone delivering the material and the student simply passively listening and that's all, and maybe sometimes taking notes. So when the learner is active, then the learner makes mistakes. That provides an opportunity for the teacher to give the feedback. Why are they making mistakes and how the mistakes can be avoided. So in the class also, that is why you must give questions and let people answer, let people solve, and then during the solution or during their answering, you can give feedback why they're going wrong. Okay, let's go to the next topic. How does a teacher know if he or she is doing okay? So you must reflect on your teaching. So how to take feedback and then reflect on our own teaching. So let me define what is reflection. Let me quote a couplet. All of you are able to read this? Slide is
Yes.
able to see the slide. Yes. So here the poet is saying, I committed a mistake all through my life. The dust was on my face, yet I kept wiping the mirror. Okay, so often this happens with us. So we know we are not doing well, but we don't know why we are not doing well. And we attribute our failures to incorrect causes. If that happens, then we will not learn and we will not improve. This is the problem. So how to attribute our mistakes or what I can say, weaknesses to the right, trace it to the right cause, and then we can correct that weakness. Okay, so you can say reflection is about identifying where is the dust and how to remove it. Okay, identifying the cause of our weakness and then correct it. So let me skip this slide. Okay, fine. No, let me please read this slide. Yeah. So you can see here that if students don't take interest in our course, many times we attribute it to the lack of interest among the students and so on, and not into something that we might not be doing properly, right? So here is an example of how a teacher realized that through self-assessment. Okay, so this is what we are going to talk about. How do we do self-assessment? So reflection is about self-assessment. So we will avoid this interaction now because face to face it can be done better. So what is reflection? Our words and actions may not have the intended effect on students. At times the effect can be opposite to what we intended. Many times teachers introduce some new measures thinking that they will improve learning, but they may find actually it has not improved learning. It has reduced student interest. For instance, a teacher may become very enthusiastic about setting good quality questions and then end up setting some tough questions. And you find that the students are not getting, students are losing interest in the subject, right? So teacher is actually has a sincere motive, right? But it is not translating to practice. So this happens many times. Why does this happen? This happens because our awareness of both our teaching and its effects is only partial. So when we are doing an activity, its effect on the audience or students, we do not know all about it. Our awareness will be partial. This is true of any activity that we do, right? When we are doing the activity, our awareness of its effects will always be only partial. So now how do we then tackle this problem? Reflection is a mental process which expands this awareness so as to improve our teaching. So you do reflection and this reflection is done after the action. Okay, so that is the point. So reflection is a process that you do after the action to estimate the effects of the action, so that then you can do improvement if the effect is not satisfactory. So how to reflect? So first point is mental condition for reflection, openness to criticism. Unless we are open to criticism, we cannot improve. This is the first point. Now, many times we would have noted that we are open to criticism, but we are open to criticism only from some quarters. Someone else's criticism we will not accept. So we have our own ideas of whose criticism we will accept, right? So sometimes these kind of barriers, they prevent us from improving. Reflection can be difficult, even threatening, because it forces us to be honest with ourselves and to recognize not only our successes, but areas needing improvement. Now, these are the inputs for reflection. Timely feedback from students and colleagues, some guiding questions and thoughts, and research and other literature on teaching learning. Okay, so example of research on teaching learning is, for example, I presented you the research on communication skills. Which factors decide the impact of a oral communicator, right? I have drawn that circle with 55% attributing to body language, 38% to how you speak, and 7% to words, right? So that kind of material, that is a research on teaching learning process. So one can read that kind of material. That is one of the inputs. Now, in the remaining part of the talk, I will focus on how to take feedback from students and colleagues and give you some guiding questions and thoughts for reflection. Okay, so let me skip this slide. Various forms of feedback. Here is one way you can take a, monitor what is happening in your class, the effect of your teaching. You can see that in this graph, a set of activities are listed here that happen in the class. Let me read that. Student action, student question, student response, teacher question, teacher response, teacher talk, using chalkboard, using charts, using projections, using multimedia. Now the crucial point is these activities have been arranged in a certain order. This order is very important for plotting the graph. That activity which is most common is located close to the timeline. So we are plotting activity as a function of time in the class. Student action, for example, is rare. Student question is rare compared to teacher asking question to the class. Okay, because only when a student is really stimulated, he or she will ask a question. That is rare. So whichever activity is rare is located farther away from the timeline. You go in the bottom direction, okay, downward direction. Here, what is listed here is the set of teaching aids which are used: chalkboard, charts, projections, multimedia. Here also what we are doing is whichever aid is used less often is located farther away from the timeline. Often we use the board. We use chart sparingly, and even more sparingly projections and so on, right? Of course, nowadays people are using projections, meaning PowerPoint and so on now. So maybe this is more common nowadays, right? Okay. Now you plot a graph, something like this. Say this is the graph of your class. So what does it indicate? It shows that for some time the teacher has talked, then teacher has thrown a question at the class. Some student has answered the question, so you got a response. If you don't get any response, the graph will not go up. Okay. Then again teacher has started talking, using the chalkboard to explain something. Some student got interested and asked a question. Okay. The teacher started responding to the question, and so on. So this is how the graph is plotted. Anybody can plot this graph who is sitting in the class, right? How can you use this graph to get an idea of the quality of teaching learning happening? Suppose, consider a situation where you have parallel classes going on, different teachers teaching the same subject in parallel. We do this, for instance, in first semester physics, mathematics and chemistry courses, right? Because totally you have some 800 students and you can't have one teacher teaching 800. So you can divide them into maybe 10 classes. So each class has about 80. So parallelly, same material is being taught by different teachers. Now you can plot this graph in each class and you can use this graph to compare the quality of teaching learning in different classes. Whichever class has a graph whose amplitude is more and frequency is more, that class teaching learning has happened better. Why? Because consider a situation where in a certain class only teacher talked and used the board. There was no other activity. How will the graph look like? So graph will look like this. It will be some solid line on the time axis for some time, then it will shift down something like this here and then go to the chalkboard level, then again come up and that's all. So small amplitude. Okay. Whereas if students have started asking questions, the amplitude of the graph will go high. You are using some projections and so on. It is suggested that you use projection charts, multimedia. It improves learning. Then the graph will move in the downward direction to a greater depth. So this is how, if in a class teaching learning is happening better, your graph will have higher amplitude and frequency. So one can also use this approach to judge the impact of using new pedagogical techniques in the class. So you can draw a graph like this for your class or maybe 2 or 3 classes together, if not just one class. Then you introduce a new pedagogical approach. After that, you again plot the graph for 2 or 3 classes and see whether the amplitude has increased or the frequency has increased and so on. This is how you can monitor the effect of pedagogical techniques on your class. Okay, this is one way of getting feedback. Another way is what I'm following myself for my sessions, and or rather a teaching learning center is following for all our sessions. So circulate a slip among all the students. On one side of the slip, you ask the students to write what I liked most about this course or teacher. And bottom of the slip, you can ask a rating for the course and for the teacher, right? On the back side of the slip, you can ask scope for improvement. Okay, and if you want some other details, you can ask, like whether if you have a composite class containing BTech and MTech students, you may like to see whether different parts of the sections of the class are responding differently, right? So you can ask this kind of details, whether you are a BTech or an MTech student, if it is a composite class. You could also ask CGPA of the student in case you want to correlate the feedback to CGPA and do some study, right? So this is a simple but very effective technique for improving your teaching. It is important to note how to give feedback and how to ask feedback. You must always ask the positives as well as scope for improvement. Okay. For instance, the statement here, scope for improvement is very important. It should not be like this. So I should not say one side of the paper you write what you like, other side of the paper you write what you don't like. It is very important to frame the statement correctly when you are seeking feedback. If you can just try this yourself if you want. If you ask students what they don't like, they will write so many things. They will say, I don't like the benches and this classroom environment. Somebody will say this fan is not working properly, right? These all kinds of things you will get on which you may not have any control, right? Whereas if you ask scope for improvement, then what happens is that student thinks for a while before writing it there. Okay. So this is another important thing about feedback. Frame your statements properly. Now, this particular format of seeking feedback, a teacher can do after about 3 weeks of starting the course. Instead of doing it only at the end, you can do at the end. But then what happens if you do at the end, then the motivation for student to give feedback is not that strong, because for that student or those set of students, the situation is not going to improve. Right? Because you're seeking the feedback at the end of the course. Only for the next set of students you can improve. Whereas if you take this feedback sometime during the first 1/3 of the semester, after about 2 to 3 weeks, then the student has a good motivation. Okay, because he or she feels that your feedback will be used for improving the remaining part of the course, right? So this is what is the suggestion. Please take the feedback at 2 to 3 weeks into the course. In fact, the ideal time is, if you have a set of quizzes and so on, ideal time to take the feedback is after first quiz, because the student should also see what kind of questions you are setting, right? And so on. So just after the first quiz, that is the right time to take the feedback. And you can use the feedback for improving your remaining part of the course. Okay, let me pause here and see if people have any questions or comments. I have talked about 2 different formats of feedback. Both are important.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
We see only a plain slide. There is only title. Is there something you expect to be?
No, what is the title? No, what is the title you are able to see?
Title is scope for improvement for this course.
Yes, and you can see that bottom BTech, MTech and CGP and all.
Yes.
That is all. Because this is how your paper will look like when you slip, that you circulate among students. The student has to write here in the blank portion. That is what is suggested. See, look at the previous slide. What I like most about this course, this blank portion is meant for students to write. That is why it is a blank slide. It is telling what kind of a slip you can circulate among your students. Exact size of the slip is 1/4 of an A4 size paper. On one side and back side. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yeah. The blank space is meant for the student to write the feedback, give them. This descriptive feedback is very important. See, this is another point I want to make. Many times we are very fond of rating, okay, student rating of teachers, which is what is given here on this slide at the bottom, teacher rating and so on. Unfortunately, the difficulty with this, using just this number is, supposing you get a rating of say 6 or 7, let's say. Now you are not happy about it, you want to get 9 or 10. Just by knowing your rating, you don't know how to improve. Whereas the descriptive feedback will give you guidelines on how to improve yourself. So descriptive feedback is very important.
Sir, Neeraja James writes, sir, there is a more chance of getting biased feedback.
When there is more chance of getting biased feedback?
Neeraja, would you like to clarify? She writes, so any specific criteria to analyze it, because students are different from one to another.
Correct. Yeah, that is true. So no particular criterion. I mean, they will write what they like most. Now, let me tell you why we should ask for both things, what you like and where is the scope for improvement. Supposing I only ask where is the scope for improvement and I don't ask what they liked. So example, I will tell you. One teacher took only critical feedback saying, you please tell me what are the things you are not happy about. 2 or 3 students wrote, your quiz questions were very difficult. 2 or 3 students out of a class of about, I think 30 or 35. 2 or 3 students wrote this. Now the teacher, after the first quiz, the teacher thought he should improve. So next time quiz, he made it easy, little bit easier, right? Then what happened is he took a feedback again. Many students wrote that this time quiz was not as challenging as the last time. Okay. So now what has happened is 1 or 2 people have given negative feedback. Other people have just kept quiet. Though they were happy about the quiz. Their questions were nice. They were challenging enough and so on. It was an elective course, by the way, not core course. So students who have taken the course, they have taken because they are very much interested in the subject. So you see what has happened is if I ask only negative things, then I might try to correct them. In the process, I might be changing something, removing something that is actually many students are positive about. So I should know what students are happy about and where students need improvement, so that when I try to do improvement without my knowledge inadvertently, I should not remove something that is positive, right? I should not replace something positive already there. So that is why we should ask both the things, what they like and where they see scope for improvement. That is all. There is no other guideline here to collect the feedback. My suggestion is you please try this out instead of speculating. And then if you have any difficulty, you can ask, right? I mean, you ask means it is not necessary that you should, I'm not saying now, you try it out in your class and you can send an email to our teaching learning center to us if you have any specific difficulty in using this feedback. Any other question?
No, sir.
Okay. So we are coming to the end of the thing. Guiding thoughts. There are some guiding thoughts, very nice quotations about learning. So here is one quote of a famous physicist, or rather he is an astronomer, Fred Hoyle. So he says, it is the true nature of mankind to learn from mistakes, not from examples. It's a very interesting statement. We learn only from mistakes. So what does it mean? If this is true, then a good teacher is one who allows a lot of scope to the students to commit mistakes and then gives them feedback how to correct. If a teacher doesn't give chance to students to speak or to doesn't involve them in some solving some problems and so on, and only focuses on speaking, that is all, delivering content in the class, then students will not learn, because students learn from mistakes. Even if you are giving examples, you are doing solved examples in the class, please understand this. The more impact will happen if you make the students do an activity and then give them feedback on the mistakes they are committing. This is a crucial thing, right? So this is one guiding thought for all teachers. They should try to implement this in their pedagogy. Another interesting thought. Education is not about learning diverse subjects. It is about learning diverse ways to the same subject. Please think about it for a few seconds. See, many times we hear a criticism that our education is not developing creativity among students. Now, what are signs of creative thinking? So one sign of creative thinking is the ability to look at the same thing from different angles. Okay, thinking differently, different ways of thinking, doing the same thing in many ways. This is a sign of creativity. Just think classical music, if you take Indian classical music. Okay, who is a more creative singer? That person is a more creative singer who can have more varieties of combination of swaras, right? In his or her rendering of the particular raga or music. If you have more variety in your combination of swaras, then you are said to be more creative. An artist, more creative person, uses more shades of colors, right? So ability to do the same thing in different ways is a sign of creativity. So that is what this particular quotation is saying. Education is not about learning diverse subjects. It is about learning diverse ways to the same subject. A practical application of this would be a mathematics teacher who is teaching theorems and proofs should spend time in teaching different ways of proving the same theorem rather than teaching more theorems. Okay? A person should spend more time teaching different ways of proving the same theorem. This is what will develop creativity. More ways of doing the same thing. More ways of understanding a concept you should discuss. Now immediately the teacher's doubt is, then how will I cover the syllabus? If I spend more time talking about different ways of doing the same thing, then how will I cover the syllabus? So the answer to this question is, all topics need not be covered in the class. Certain topics are more difficult to understand. Those topics, more time should be spent. Some topics which are easy to understand, students can be asked to read up by themselves. Self-study. Teacher can use self-study concept. Teacher can declare, see, for this course, these are the topics. Out of these topics, I'm expecting you to read by yourself. This is the textbook. From here you read, because it doesn't require much effort to grasp. These other things are more difficult. Those I'm going to spend more time. And spending more time means what? Telling the students how the same point can be understood in so many different ways. Okay, so this is one guideline for good teaching that teachers can adopt. Okay, the story I have already told. So with that, I am coming to the end of my session. Okay, and I am repeating the entire recipe here. So any questions?
There's one question. Shania Festus has asked, are there any tips to prompt the students to ask questions?
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. So, in fact, one speaker, he used to adopt this approach. You know, he would not ask the students, okay, what are the questions? What are your questions? He would say, I am sure all of you have a lot of questions. I want to know what are those. Instead of saying, yes, any questions, he would say, I am sure you have a lot of questions, right? And I want to know what are those. So this is one way you can stimulate people to ask questions. Another way, many times people are not interested, people feel shy of speaking up in the class. What you can do is you can circulate slips like what I have told earlier, seeking feedback. So this circulating slips and making students to write on them, actually this method can be used in so many different situations. So here is one situation where what you can do is, please write your questions on this slip. You say that. Instead of saying any questions, you circulate slips among students and say, please write your doubts on this slip. I am sure you please try it, and I have tried it myself. You will get a lot of doubts. So this is one way you can make students ask questions. And then you can collect those slips and then answer them. Another way, I have tried this. You in the class, you keep a TA, teaching assistant, who is your own student, and you tell him that whenever I ask the students to raise their doubts or ask questions, you ask a question. Okay, you tell this beforehand to the student, TA. Generally what happens is, people wait for somebody to ask and then a lot of doubts will come. It is exactly like a chemical reaction, nucleation and growth. If there is no nucleation of a reaction at a point, the reaction doesn't build up. So same thing about this asking questions. One student should ask a question, then a lot of students will start asking. So you can initiate this reaction of asking questions by planting a student who will ask you a question. This pre-planned. And then other students will follow. This is another method I suggest to make students ask questions. Does it answer your question? Let me get the response from that person. How to make students ask questions. Okay, one more thing I want to say. Whether a student will get stimulated or not depends a lot on your explanations. If you try to make things simple, right, by giving good explanations, then that stimulates interest in the student. Unless the student's interest is stimulated, they will not ask questions. This is another thing. So our explanations also we should improve so that students get interested in the subject. Anything else?
Dr. Srinaja KK asks, in a department or in college, who will manage the feedback form and give recommendation to teachers?
Yeah, so one is the teacher himself or herself, right? Because the students are giving that those slips to you. And in fact, in order to get a really unbiased feedback, what the teacher can do is, teacher can go out of the class. When you, after circulating the slips, you just go out of the class and ask some student to collect the slips and bring it to you. So one is that. Second, as I have said, you can use your own colleague also. You can identify some colleague with whom you are comfortable and whose criticism you are open, right? And you can ask that colleague to interpret that feedback if in case you have any difficulty.
There is one more question. Dr. Mini asks, how far is constructive feedback possible in a class of heterogeneous students?
Yeah, you do get a feedback. You please try whatever approach I have suggested. That is why I am saying that you please try this out. And then if you have any difficulty, you can get back to us. We will help you there. Because what we are suggesting is something we have tried ourselves. It is not something that we are teaching some theory or something like that. All the points that we are mentioning in our sessions, they have all been tried and tested.
So that's all, sir.
Okay, so somebody had asked me to give the example of a open book exam question, right?
Yes.
I will just put that up as the last thing. Yeah, are you able to see this?
Yes.
Yeah. So now this is a question paper in digital signal processing. Okay, what is interesting is you can see here time allowed 120 minutes and time taken to set the question paper 600 minutes. Okay, the teacher is also telling how much time it took for the teacher to set that question. And now let me read the instruction so that it will give you some idea of this. So read the question carefully before answering. Some events and incidents described in this question paper are either the products of the instructor's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Some portions of the questions are copied verbatim from the sources mentioned. However, quotes have been avoided in the question paper to maintain this some mistake in language, maintain thought. Make suitable logical assumptions where necessary. In case of mismatch in sampling or clock frequency between multiple blocks, insert a sampling clock frequency. This technical thing. Okay, now it is interesting to see how the question is. So the statement is fairly long of the question. It is trying to describe some. Are you able to read this?
Yes.
Manju, you are able to read it? Yeah, I will give you a couple of minutes to read it. So there is some figure and then it goes on, right? So you can see that it is a long question, right? So describing a practical situation. So I'm just giving an example of a open book exam. Just this one question, the entire test is just this one question. Does it give some idea? It is not necessary open book exam has to be like this, but I'm just giving one example of it. Okay, any response from the person who wanted this example of an open book question?
Hello, Dr. Thomas.
Hello. Hello, sir. We want to gather students of varying knowledge levels, varying learning capacities. Then how do we apply or incorporate such kind of techniques in such a situation?
Can you please repeat? I didn't catch.
Sir, we want to conduct examination to students having different learning levels.
Correct.
So how do we can do justice to all types of learners by doing such kind of open book textbook?
So that is a good question. So see, that is why the open book question should contain parts which there should be, say, 30-40% of the question should be, say, everybody should be able to answer. Yeah. Right? That is why in that way you have to take care. That is only way. That is only way. So this more than this one cannot say unless you specifically give. So that is why this has to be done. If you want this, I mean, the question to answer your question more effectively, you will have to give me an example of some question you have set. Then I can give my feedback on that. That is the only way it can be discussed.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I say you, I mean the people. They have to give concrete example of something, and then one can discuss. Otherwise, in general terms, it is difficult to say. All that people will say is you set questions so that say 30-40% of the marks questions everybody should be able to answer. Then there are a few which only few questions which only a few will be able to answer, and see things like that. That's all. One can only talk in such general terms.
Okay. Thank you.
If you don't have a specific example. So if there are no questions, we can close the session.
So, sir, I don't have any question right now.
Fine.
Hello, Kairali, there are more questions.
No, I can't see any over here, except there is one. No.
There is one question from Dr. Srikala MS. How an objective type test and descriptive test differ in assessing a student?
Yeah. So see, objective type tests advantage is the evaluation is very easy for a large number of students. That is the advantage of objective type test. And the second advantage is you will have very few complaints regarding the evaluation in objective type tests. Those are the two advantages, right? That is why people are entrance exams, many of them are using objective type. That is easy to evaluate a large number of people using computer, and also less complaints about evaluation, right? That they didn't get the right marks and so on. On the other hand, however, the students' ability to explain ideas and so on, that is not getting tested, right? In a descriptive question, that here the communication becomes important, because objective type questions you are only to do thinking and ticking. So this expression, this ability is not getting tested in objective type. For example, we have seen in IIT Madras, for instance, many students in the first semester mathematics courses fail because they cannot write proofs properly, because the entrance exam is objective type. So they're not used to answering descriptive questions. They have been coached for objective type only. But when they come to IIT, world is not going to be objective type. I mean, practical questions, right? You will have to write details, descriptions. So they normally, many students have difficulty writing proofs. So they fail. So that is why it is good to have descriptive questions. The student's thinking process also comes out in that. So you can give better feedback there. Also, one can use Viva, for example. Viva is also a good evaluation method, which we are not using that much. We should use combination of written and oral or Viva examination. That is good combination. In Viva, you are able to see how the student thinks.
There are no more questions, sir.
Yeah, so do we close then?
Okay. Thank you, sir. Prasad, sir.
Yeah.
Excuse me, could you please stop sharing the screen, sir?
Myself, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So, respected Professor Sripath Karmakar and all the fellow participants, today we had with us Professor Sripath Karmakar to inculcate us on effective and efficient teaching. Today in the session, Professor Karmakar particularly giving emphasis on the factors governing the effectiveness of communication. To start with, when our resource person asked, Srimati Srija Narayanan came up with a slideshow presentation to make us understand and analyze how a good slideshow presentation would be. The topic chosen by the presenter was of greater relevance of this time of pandemic. The presentation was exceptionally good and got much appreciation from the resource person as well as from the fellow participants. Congratulations, Srija, and on behalf of IQAC Sri Shankara College and all those who participated in the session, let me thank Srija for your effective role as a presenter. Professor Karmakar deserves special mention regarding the successful conduct of this FDP. He was in constant communication with us regarding the FDP since it was originally planned to schedule in last November, as the welcome speaker rightly mentioned it in the opening session of the program. He was with us in the last 3 days. It was really a constant encouragement to go about with this 5 days program. Sir, we are really fortunate to have you here as a very resourceful person to lead us all in the realm of our teaching career. On behalf of the IQAC, Sri Shankara College, Kaladi, and all the attendees here, with utmost respect, I express my sincere gratitude to you, sir, for your constant encouragement and the much valuable deliberations. Thank you very much, sir. See you all right here at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Thank you, one and all. Remember, you all will get another mail to join for the next session. Thank you.
And also, please give the feedback.
Yes.
Sure, sir.
We'll send you.
Yeah.